my hope is research will increase, whether it's, a descheduling on the federal level, but we really need more research around how cannabinoids can positively impact a person and also the harms.
I've scaled to multi-million-dollar exits, and now I'm taking on cannabis. Scaling, selling, and winning isn't just my story, it's my strategy. If you want to turn ideas into profit, you're in the right place. Today we're talking to Commissioner Kimberly Roy of the Massachusetts Cannabis Control Commission, who's seen the opioid epidemic up close and is now helping to shape the state's cannabis industry.
Working in a correctional facility and with almost 90% of incarcerated individuals there due to substance use disorder, co-occurring disorders with mental health issues.
We dive into the future of advertising rules, whether the medical market still has a place, new social consumption license types, which I'm really excited about, and many more.
Because we want to keep you in compliance. We don't want to see you fail. We don't want to see you go out of business. We want to see you be compliant. But having said that, this is a heavily regulated industry, and you
gotta follow the rules.
And you got to follow the rules.
You have to collaborate with regulators and be a relentless advocate if you truly want to drive meaningful change. So let's get into it.
First of all, Jason, thank you very much for having me on your podcast, High Functioning. I appreciate it. I always look forward to an opportunity to come out in the community, talk to folks, talk to stakeholders. So I want to start by thanking you for that. And over the next hour, I look forward to talking to you not only about who I am and what I do, but the industry in Massachusetts, the cannabis industry in Massachusetts as a whole. So my name is Kimberly Roy. I'm one of 5 commissioners at the Cannabis Control Commission. I sit in the designated public health seat. I was appointed by former Governor Charlie Baker in 2021, and I have a 5-year term. And it's been very interesting. Prior to that, what led me to be a commissioner?
That was going to be my next question.
Yeah, so I'm anticipating.
How'd you get in here?
Yeah, so prior to becoming a Cannabis Control Commissioner, I was in the leadership team over at the Worcester County Sheriff's Office.
Okay.
And part of that, really, the unfortunate part of that was I got to see the opioid epidemic up front, up close, working in a correctional facility, and with almost 90% of incarcerated individuals there due to substance use disorder, co-occurring disorders with mental health issues. It's a really big issue. The fentanyl crisis, the heroin crisis, and the harms of the opioids. That I've seen them up close. So that really impacted me. My time there, I co-authored a curriculum for young people called Face to Face, which talks about the myths and the dangers of substance use and opioids. And it's a direct path to prison a lot of times. Yeah. And so I personally, with the sheriff at that time, we brought this in front of over 400,000 middle and high school students to talk about substance use disorder. And a lot of kids get their information from social media platforms, and a lot of it can be misinformation. And prior to that, I worked in healthcare for Johnson & Johnson. So all of these things form my lens, if you will, in helping to regulate the cannabis industry.
Yeah, and I'd like to there's a few things you mentioned there that I think are really interesting, which is, first of all, for all the kids listening on this one, all the kids who get their information from my podcast, you're about to get educated. So basically, one of the things that you brought up was the opioid stuff, right? And I do want to say that I love cannabis and all these things, but there are people who can also potentially abuse cannabis too, so you have to be careful with that. Although we know a lot of people who consume cannabis are trying to get off opiates, it has successfully have done those things. But cannabis always like to be a big, people who are proponents of cannabis always love to say it's this panacea that's just going to cure all things. And it's just like, it's not necessarily true. So just want to preface it with that, being like, there are things that can come from it that you can do potentially harm.
And I appreciate you saying that, Jason. And I've said that many times. It's like we don't fully know the benefits or the harms of this plant.
It's for studying.
Yes
research.
and no. The plant is thousands of years old,
right.
But the research just hasn't kept up with that. And, a big part of it is the dichotomy that here we have a legalized crop and an illegal on the federal level. So that's a strange dichotomy. And even in the medical schools, we all have what's called an endocannabinoid system. And they only started teaching that in medical schools 20 years ago. So even that needs to catch up. So my hope is research will increase, whether it's, a descheduling on the federal level, but we really need more research around how cannabinoids can positively impact a person and also the harms.
Yeah. And there's lots of benefits to it, and I don't want to get that misconstrued either. But there is CHS, right? Cannabis hyperemesis syndrome.
Yeah, which people vomit excessively
for like a week.
Yeah.
So it's not this panacea, and even though it can have a lot of benefits and could also be a treatment or at least a way to put people at ease who are going through chemo and stuff like that, which I have a strong passion for. I'm a cancer survivor myself.
Oh wow.
So like for me, I'm like really passionate about the medical side of this, and I do really truly feel that a lot of people who are even consuming our products or consuming cannabis in general is really coming from a medical side, whether they're just trying to relax at the end of the day and they're just stressed out for work or whatever it might be, to actual people who have medical issues directly.
And I agree with you in your enthusiasm on the medical side. I too have that, and we have about 100,000 qualified patients and just over 400 providers. And recently the commission, when we did our latest round of regulations last month, we included nurse practitioners. We always had nurse practitioners as certifying providers, but they had to be under the umbrella of a certifying physician. So now we've removed that barrier. So for nurse practitioners listening out there, you can become a certifying provider. And the goal is the ratio, if you think about 100,000 patients and 400 providers, it's really not a great ratio. So hopefully we were able to get more providers. And really folks need more information and education. I go around the county and the state, and I speak to older Americans at senior centers, and I provide them an educational, informational presentation. They're so kind of curious, right?
Yeah.
And so many of them, we have so many great questions at the end, and they want to learn more. So the goal is to give them education, information, and, as I always say, consume safely and responsibly. And if you're new to cannabis, then you really want to do your research, and you want to know the onset of action. How fast is the product going to kick in? Are you going to feel that sensation, if you will, or the high? And, start low and go slow until you're able to understand how it impacts you in your own body.
Advice. Yeah, that's fantastic advice. That's one of the things that we give often. And, one of the reasons why we got into this, I personally got into it, was because I had a medical issue at the time, and I actually tried consuming cannabis as almost like a last resort, because I was just like the dentists and the doctors, and nothing could release my jaw from opening again. And so I finally found cannabis worked because it attacked the root cause, which was my stress. And so ever since then, I've been a huge proponent of it and its benefits. And at the end of the day, like, we really have to focus on providing, especially the onset times, which we focus on onset times, by the way. I'm not sure how familiar you are with our products, but like our fastest acting product is like 3 minutes. And so you can really dial in and, to use a scientific term, titrate your experience to be like just a little bit at a time. You don't have to go crazy, right? Whereas a traditional edible, you take it, it's like, I don't know what's going to happen in an hour.
Exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned that, Jason, because when I do speak to old Americans, how many are familiar with cannabis gummies?
Yeah.
Every hand goes in the room.
Or brownies from the 70s.
And I ask, how many of you know how long it takes before you feel the effects? And no one knows.
Right.
And they think 5 minutes. And my fear is, okay, if I'm new, I'm old American and I'm new, and I take a cannabis gummy and I take it and I'm not feeling anything, I don't want people to stack them because they're not feeling it yet. Exactly. Yeah. So I really stress that as well. They have to understand the product, the onset of action, and titrate, like you said.
Yeah. And I don't normally have my laptop open. I have it open because I posted on LinkedIn, and a lot of people posted questions that they would have liked to ask you.
Sure.
Liz Palmer, a marketing director at Base Direct Extracts, was actually saying about the medical program. So multiple dispensaries are shedding their medical license and closing those doors. I need to drive farther between medical licenses now more than ever to meet my medication needs. I'm also a medical patient, and you had mentioned the 100,000 number. I think that has been decreasing over the years.
It's in the 90,000s probably
it
now.
Was probably, do you remember what the high was? Was 120,000?
I don't think it was much high. No, I don't. My time as a commissioner, I don't remember getting that high.
But now it's in the 90s or so. And so, what do you say to people like Liz who are just like, are we? Not that we're not getting rid of it, but it's also just like, the market's kind of, especially the operator side, which is, I know you guys do consumer safety, but you also regulate the license holders themselves. Like, is there anything that you guys have planned coming up that's going to help alleviate maybe some of the burdens that the medical operators are dealing with, such as vertical integration or anything like that, or just making the licensing fees a little more approachable? Because I know a lot of licensed operators that I talk to, it's a financial mismatch right now. They're having a lot harder times to be able to generate the income to be able to be profitable because more operators coming in or whatever it might be.
So let's unpack that a little bit. So it sounds like that was a patient that reached out to you via LinkedIn, and today, and I just asked for the numbers before we got here, we have 109 medical treatment centers throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and they are located, to the best of my knowledge, in just about every county, perhaps not Dukes County, the islands, but the mainland counties. I believe there's a medical treatment center. I think maybe the further west you go, someone told me in the Berkshire area there might be less, and people have to drive extra distance, and which is unfortunate. And why do people become medical patients? Well, they have a qualifying medical condition that they've had the talk with their provider that cannabis is an appropriate and efficacious medicine for them, and they become a medical patient, and that avails them to higher potency products. It avails them to no tax on their products. It avails them to discounts at medical treatment centers as well. So those are all good things, and it's difficult to become a medical treatment center because the way, and you alluded to this, Jason, the way the regulations are currently set up is that you have to be vertically integrated. And what does that mean? That means that, and I've visited many indoor cultivation sites. In farming, any kind of farming is a science, and it takes everything from the right lighting to the right temperature, the right humidity, the right water,
everything.
the soil. Yeah. I mean, there's so much that goes into it. It's like NASA in half of these places that I go visit, and it costs millions and millions of dollars
just
to get started. Yeah. And then you have the licensing fees in the process of getting started, and the lack of access to capital because of the Controlled Substances Act, it's Schedule 1, and there's not like you can go pull up to your local corner bank and say, I need right.
We've tried.
So there are headwinds and a lot of challenges. Folks, there are patient advocacy groups that are lobbying to remove the requirement for vertical integration, and that we inherited that when cannabis was under the DPH, the Department of Public Health. So that's probably a challenge why to your listener that there aren't more medical treatment centers, because it involves an extraordinary amount of startup capital.
Right.
But
here's where it comes in, though, because it's like, and this is maybe a clarifying thing for the audience as well. Like, do the commissioners have the ability to take the vertical integration down?
It's my understanding that's more of a statutory fix. So the legislature will have to. So
the legislature, in order to get and that's why I think I've seen bills proposed in the House, and I think even maybe one made to the Senate potentially. With the de-verticalization.
De-vertical integration. And the word vertical integration isn't even listed in our regs. Because I've done the control F. I've looked. And so it's not even there.
Right.
I don't even think it's in our glossary of our regs.
Right.
It's not there, but it's a term that everybody uses.
How do we get, so I guess maybe, so in your role, a lot of people are like, why isn't the commission doing this? Why aren't they doing this? Like, how do you see the role, and how, like, what is your jurisdiction? Is that probably the right
That's a perfect way to ask it. And it's complicated. And what I mean by that, so let's go back, right? So in 2008, it was decriminalization. 2012, there was medical, and the will of the voters in 2016 passed question 4 in favor of legalization of adult use. Massachusetts was the first state east of the Mississippi to have legalized adult use. So then what happened? So the legislature took the ballot question and had to make some refinements to it. And so they did that. And so then the Governor Baker signed that into law. Okay. But then, so now you had to stand up an industry and an agency agency in 2017. So two things. So you
In
had
the
5
same
inaugural
time,
commissioners.
yeah.
You had a handful of staff in like a small little office space, and now commissioners are subject to open meeting law. So we can't even all go to lunch together.
Yeah.
So we have only 2 of us can talk about a
the same-
topic.
yeah.
So that makes things complicated. That's a whole other dynamic.
I'm very familiar with that because
Yeah.
I actually am on a committee in my town
Oh,
as well.
so you're familiar
Open meeting
with
law
the
is something I'm very
confines.
familiar with.
Right. So now we've stood up an agency in an industry, and we started accepting applications, I believe, in the spring of 2018, and then in the fall of 2018, you had the first 2, one in Leicester and one in Northampton.
6-hour
right?
wait,
And the
6-hour
waits and
lines.
the lines were like crazy
they were like
long
busing people in from other parking lots and stuff like
and I think
that.
it happened on like Black Friday, which didn't help,
wow.
right? So it was crazy. So now back to your question, what is our jurisdiction? So you have the legislature that creates the laws, the statutes. We have 94G, 94I, and then it's up to the commissioners and the commission to take the laws, and then we interpret the legislation into regulation, and we have to work within the confines of that. So we have the structure. Now we have to put the meat on the bones in the regulation, and that's what the commission does. Now you have local control, right? So the host community agreements, which the whole other big topic of conversation, and the acts of 2022 address that. And again, we had to convert legislation into regulation around that. So you have an element of local municipal control, right? Zoning, you're in an industrial complex, right? And certain towns want it in the industrial areas, and that's their prerogative, and that's great, that's fine. And then you have federal, right? So now, again, cannabis is the Controlled Substances Act is a Schedule 1, meaning it sees no medicinal or value with a high probability of addiction, and it's on par with heroin. So that presents its whole other challenges, especially for folks like yourself and folks in the industry where you have limited access to banking capital, you have no bankruptcy protections, you have 280E, so you can't deduct on your federal taxes ordinary business deductions. So you have inflated profits, and it's basically you're taxed at an 80 to 90% tax rate as a result of 280E. So when I speak to folks like chambers of commerce, I'll ask the audience, now Chamber of Commerce is business people. How many people own a business? Most of the hands go up. How many people sell a product? A lot of the hands go up. I say, imagine the product that you currently sell. You can't ship it across state lines. You can't fly it. You can't send it over the water, over federal waters. You don't have
Can't send it in the
bankruptcy.
mail. Yeah.
You can't send it in the mail. You don't have bankruptcy protections. You can't deduct ordinary business, expenses, and you have limited access to banking in there. And that like shocks everybody. And despite it, it's a $7 billion industry. With all of those headwinds, it's a $7 billion industry. Now, back to your question.
Yeah.
Well, so with those confines, some things, are federal. Like we can't say you can drive it to Rhode Island. We don't have the authority to tell you to do that because you can't cross it across state lines. We can't tell you to ship it or fly it. We don't have the authority to do that. We can't tell a local community where to zone it.
Right.
We don't have the authority to do that. Or even host it because there are no towns. So we don't have that authority either. What we do have the authority to do is to establish regulations, whether it's, your security cameras or, how you handle product, how you store product, how you dispose of product. And we have to uphold public health, public safety, and public welfare and make this an equitable marketplace. So that's what we are charged to do. And we have to stay in our lane.
So if somebody who wants medical deverticalization, that's like you got to go to call your senator.
You do.
Like those are the people you really got to
Right.
convince.
Right.
Don't be putting in your little suggestions box in Worcester,
Right.
Union
I
Square.
mean, you can try, and I can ask for a legal opinion, and they'll
Yeah.
say, this is a statutory fix.
Right.
For instance, I've been very public and supportive of medical reciprocity. So those 90.
is that?
So medical reciprocity is other states have medical programs, and if you were to travel to one of those states, say Hawaii, okay, they will recognize your Massachusetts medical card that you're a patient. And you can go to a dispensary there and get
the
product
benefits or
and
whatever
get the benefits
of their
We don't
program.
offer that. We don't reciprocate, if you will, and we don't offer that in kind. And I to me, that's like low hanging fruit. Massachusetts is
Seems like an easy one,
a
yeah.
tourist state.
A lot of people
right?
coming in, yeah.
People come in, I'm sure, with medical cards, but that's statute. That's a fix the legislature has to do. We can't do it. So
Even
that's
though it's
another
low hanging
example.
fruit to flip pretty quickly and like writing it it's not as simple as
It's
just writing
not.
it. You
And,
have to go through the whole
and
process.
we thank our partners in the legislature, and they heard from the industry and they heard from stakeholders, and they addressed that in the acts of 2022 to bring equity into the industry, because the host community agreements, they had to address that. They addressed municipal equity in that bill as well. The Social Equity Trust Fund, that was established in that bill as well. So, and this is still, a nascent industry, if you will, and so I know that the legislature, we're grateful for their work, that they address those issues, but I know they hear from folks continuously on other areas, and I'm sure as they move forward, they'll address other areas.
Yeah, and I would imagine, obviously, because it's always a moving target, it seems like. There's always another thing that we have to either battle or something like that. So for the medical side, we kind of put a cap on that one. But when it comes to another really popular topic on this LinkedIn post was about lab testing.
Sure.
So, there's people who are commenting about, for instance, remediation and mold irradiation, stuff like that. And it says, why is the CCC allowing this? So, so it's like things like that. And then also just the whole lab shopping controversy and stuff like that. Like, how do we know which labs to choose in that case? Or is there some kind of thing that's coming up in the near future that's going to be very clear on like standards labs? And there's a lot of things have been thrown out.
Yeah, this is like a big
It's a
topic,
big topic.
and it's like one of my priorities, and I've been talking about it for a long time. So there's so many areas. So you said about remediating product. And so some jurisdictions, I believe Nevada, I believe Connecticut, if you remediate your product through radiation or another means, certain states now are requiring that disclosure on the package.
On the package itself.
I'm in favor of that.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something we can tackle. I'd like to know if my product was remediated. I don't
think I even know sometimes, because especially the radiation stuff, that's a new topic to me. And I know I've heard the term a few times before, but that's basically when they shoot radiation at it, so it just kind of like cleans it.
Cleans the weed.
Cleans the weed.
And
so I would love to know if my weed's been cleaned like that.
So let's put a pin in that, because that is kind of a newer bubbling up topic that other jurisdictions are starting to address. And so I have a mental pin in that one. Like, I want to revisit that. In regards to what they call lab shopping or data manipulation. So Massachusetts is structured where we have 13 independent testing labs. And so we regulate those labs. And that means we can do scheduled inspections, surprise inspections, just like any other licensee. You could have a surprise inspection or a scheduled one.
Could happen right now. I'm waiting for the door to open.
So at any time. And we have the jurisdiction to do that at any time. And so we want to make sure that, products are safe and that everyone is compliant with the regulations. But we don't have what's called a standards lab or a reference lab. Massachusetts is referred to as a standards lab, and across the country people call it a reference lab. And that would be a state-run laboratory that could do independent, separate and aside from our ITLs, can do independent verification and confirmatory testing to make sure that there's accuracy in testing and labeling, so that the potency, what it says on the certificate of analysis, is accurate, that the total yeast and mold counts are accurate, and
So when
pesticides that make sure there's no pesticides and no other contaminants.
So if the state was to put together a standards lab, that means that it was almost like a mystery shopper where you can now, I know that's a different topic necessarily, but are license holders potentially going to be required to send it to both the standards lab and to it? Or is it really just like you're picking randomly out of samples?
I don't know ultimately what that would look like. Maybe it could be a combination of both. So secret or surprise shopper, or it's a requirement to submit it to the state-run lab. We don't have it, so we don't have any of the details, but we need it. And we need that. I think we critically need it for public health, quite honestly. And we've had reports of data manipulation and lab shopping. Now, if a lab is knowingly and wantonly manipulating data, I think lab shopping is too nice a word. That's lab fraud. That's fraud at that point.
Yeah, because you're going from maybe a test result that says 25%, and you're like, actually, take me through that.
So
is it going to 40% or something like that? Yeah.
Right? And
how do they do it?
You talk about the TAC count. You talk about THC.
TAC, for instance.
Yes.
Yeah.
And if it's 40%, how can we really don't have the infrastructure in place. We don't have our own state-run lab where we can confirm, is this truly at 40% TAC count?
Right.
Right.
And you have to trust the scientists that are running these labs too, because these are highly trained scientists. So you're like leveraging them to be like, well, and then you've got to maybe bring in an independent person to be like, well, how do you know it's lab fraud in this particular case, right? So it's a lot of self-reporting.
And if I may, right. And right now, the system is inherently conflicted as it stands, because for us to do any confirmatory testing, and we have, like, remember eValley, the vape crisis, right? But we have to use the independent testing labs.
Right.
So
you have to rely on them still.
So they're not truly an independent third party.
Right.
They're not.
Right.
So that system is inherently conflicted, and we need, and I've been advocating, we need to have the resources to be able to do independent, separate and aside from the ITL's confirmatory testing. And it's not like we can send it to Rhode Island or a neighboring state, because you really can't ship it across state lines.
Right.
So it's not like we can do that either. So we're putting our collective heads together at the commission to figure out how we can advance this. We really need we do need the support of the legislature to be able to do that, because we would need the resources to be able to, stand up a lab.
Yeah, it sounds
the
there's budget
instrumentation
and
that you would need. And it's not an inexpensive endeavor.
No. And I know that mystery shopping is one of those things that I think is brought up in a meeting that we were both attending, and maybe you had said it, or as Commissioner Stebbins maybe that said it, that mystery shopping is problematic also, because it's like you're a municipal employee or government employee going and buying weed with government budget to go. It's like a weird thing there too, right?
Well, yes and no. We have it in the regulations, but we don't have the infrastructure to. It sounds easy, right?
Just go buy some weed.
Buy the weed and test the weed, right?
Exactly.
On its face,
Yeah.
it sounds so easy, but it's more complicated than that. Who buys the weed? Who pays for the weed? What's the chain of custody of the weed? Do we have an evidence room to supply store the weed?
Now you do you have your own vault now?
And now we don't have an independent standards lab for independent confirmatory testing.
So now you're going to send it to a lab at one of the 13
So
ITLs.
it's more complicated. So the infrastructure is not where it needs to be, but it needs to be. And
Right.
so I will continue to advocate for that. It's just not there yet.
So I totally hear you on that one, and things take time. And the way I always tell other operators is you got to kind of play the cards you've been dealt. Like, just operate within your confines of what's happening right now, and advocate for the changes you need.
Now let me back up. And if we suspect there's anything that could, severe out there, like the vaping, we will figure out a way to get this product and have some product tested, and
Right.
it would probably have to be through an ITL. But so I don't want folks to say, well, none of it's ever happened or is not happening at all. For investigatory purposes, we'll execute it.
So you have done stuff like
We have
that
executed
with
it. It's just
investigations.
not as robust, and the infrastructure is not where because it needs resources, and it's more complicated than it sounds.
Are there? I know I can probably require this through like a FOIA request or whatever, but like I don't know if you can even open this kind of can of worms, but because it's a similar topic. But I have other questions I got to ask, and I know you have limited time here. But if you were to, what's the ratio of investigators to operators? Do you know? Is it like a 1-to-1? Is it like 3 investigators for every operator? Because if there's over 1,000 licensed operators now, right?
Well,
so that may be too many investigators.
Well, let's step back. So when you apply, you're an applicant in the queue. Okay, so you don't have a property right. You don't have any type of license. And then you do your due diligence, right? There's RFIs that come out, requests for information, background checks, financials that we need.
But that's the licensing team.
Wait, I'm going to get to it. So then you come before, once all of that and the licensing team deems you compliant and everything they've asked for application purposes. You have to have a host community agreement. You have to have a location. You have to have all of these things. There's a lot of requirements. Usually takes a year, and for a retailer, over $1 million on average, right? And so there's a lot that goes into that. But when you get come before the commission and we approve your provisional license, you have a property right with that provisional license. And then the next step, you have steps to do. You have post-provisional license inspections. And then you come before us again. Once you satisfy all those requirements, then you have a final...
PFLI.
Right,
Yeah.
PFLI. And then you come before your... provisional license comes before us as a final license to approve. So we read through all of those, and to make sure I read through all your inspection reports, all the notices of deficiency, and so once you get voted on by the commission, the board, for your final license, then you're able to start to bring product on site, but not before then. And then you have to have your final license inspection and then your commence operation. So there's a lot that goes into it. There's architectural reviews. There's a lot that go into that. So I don't know, to your question, I don't know the exact ratio. I know it's not 1 to 1.
No, that seems it'd be too
right now
extreme.
we have 713 folks that have commenced operations, MEs, marijuana establishments. We have 386 of those are retailers, and then we have 109 medical treatment centers. So just that alone, those are the commence ops. That's a lot. And
there's
then
a
you
bunch in
add
the
the
queue.
folks that are in that provisional to final phase that need attention
Right.
and need inspections as well. So there's a lot that goes into it. So I don't have the exact, I mean,
I just would be curious because it seems like, it's just one of those situations where, for instance, somebody had spoken at the MCC meeting saying like, there's 7 investigators showed up to this little store. What's going on or something like that? How do we have 7 investigators showing up to a store where they've got other things to worry about or whatever, right? So it's like, obviously, I don't know the whole process on the investigator side because it's kind of like that black box, the mystery box. Like no one knows actually as an operator. I have no idea what's going on the day to day. And you send an email and you like hope to get a response kind of thing. You know what I mean? But when it comes to that ratio, it'd just be curious because it's like, the investigators are focused on specific things and there's a licensing team, obviously, that's doing the licensing process. And so like how many people, I know we have our investigator and I know last time we had a surprise inspection was October and there was 4 people here. And I was just like, okay, totally fine. 4 people, whatever. I won't comment on the specifics that happened during the investigation because I would get a little bit fired up. But
no, but I can't know.
Yeah, but you
I'm an
can't.
adjudicator. I'm a policymaker and an adjudicator. So that's.
I don't know what either of those mean. I know policymaker means policy,
so
making
for
policy.
the roles of the
Adjudicator.
commissioners, we approve, review, and approve all the licenses. We set the policy. We set regulation, and part of what we do is, if need be, we can revoke, rescind, suspend, a license if need be. But there's something called 30A where we have to be walled off from any investigation because you wouldn't want me to be prejudiced to you or any other licensee coming before us. You'd want us to be completely unbiased. So they have to put a firewall between us. So we cannot know the ins and outs.
Right.
But what I can say is that, my hope as a commissioner is that your inspector, and I've heard this, that some people love their inspector. They're a resource. It's not an adversarial posture. And that's what I would hope, because we want to keep you in compliance. We don't want to see you fail. We don't want to see you go out of business. We want to see you be compliant. But having said that, this is a heavily regulated industry, and
you gotta follow the rules.
And you got to follow the rules.
Yeah.
And so, I can't speak specifically why one would show up one day and 4 another. I can't speak to that. But what I can say is, I hope that licensees have a good relationship with their inspector and that the inspector works with them to help keep them compliant, because that's what we really want. We just want everybody to be compliant at the end
Absolutely.
of the day.
I mean, we've invited our inspector in. I got a new inspector earlier this year, and we were like, come on in. Like, whatever. Like, we've got nothing to hide. We do everything above board. So, like, we're just like, come on in. Like, doors open. Like, just figure out, like, if you want to see something, we got it. I'll pull all our Corys and RVTs or whatever you need to see. But we're here.
And we recently approved, and he's it's for budgeting their interim, but their a training manager of training for not only internal, but to go out into the community to meet with licensees, to provide trainings to help keep folks compliant. Because when I read through the post-provisional license inspections and I see what I would call a greatest hits list of the same NODs.
Right.
That the waste wasn't wasted properly, that you need 2 people, that the scale has to be a certain scale, calibrated a certain way, that it has to be under a camera, that it has to be logged in, that you didn't have a commercial grade lock on your dumpster, that the video cameras had blind spots. It's really a loop of the same NODs that I see a lot.
So I think Yeah, and notice of deficiency for those who don't familiar,
Yes.
NODs. So there's something deficient that came up in an investigation. I guess the real question is, and this is actually from a friend, Melissa Rutherford, who I've known for
I
quite
know
a bit.
Melissa,
Yeah,
through the industry.
She is, saying equal enforcement. Like, is there a way to, like, 'cause you just meant like a manager, a person who come in and can train also operators, but just not train, but you know what I mean, and educate people. I should probably say better. But what about, is there such a thing as like an SOP for the investigators to follow? Like, these are the things you can, because, you hear those horror stories. And again, I'm not going to any specific ones. I'm not going to talk about specific ones, but like you hear horror stories be like, is this an opinion or is this the regulation? And an investigator sometimes have an opinion about how
Right.
things should be done versus like actually in the books.
Right, and so it makes me sad.
I'm not trying to
think
get you in
that-
trouble
no,
with
no,
your
no. Let me just say,
investigator
as a
team.
commissioner,
Yeah.
I would not expect disparate treatment among licensees. Everybody should be treated fairly and equally. Having said that, everybody needs to follow the rules and the regulations, and no
100%.
one should be,
I think we all, as operators, especially the ones that I
Yes.
know, they're friends of mine, they
Right.
100% are trying to do everything the right way.
Right, and we have a fairly newer chief of investigations and enforcement, and was acting, and she's been there not less than a year. She's been in the commission a number of years. So, but she's bringing in a new philosophy, new sheriff in town, if you will.
Okay.
And I think there's positive, and I work with her very closely and in constant communication, and I think is a positive development. And I'm quite confident that she wouldn't want disparate treatment of any licensees, and if there is, then we need to know, because everybody needs to be treated the same and fairly. And I'm sure there's people listening that are like, I wasn't in this, and I have an example of this and that.
Yeah, is there a suggestions box or
Well,
like a notes
and I'm
thing?
glad you asked that. So
Yeah.
I'm in a process. I've been advocating, working with the commission, that we are going to develop a tip line.
Okay.
Right now, if you have an industry complaint, we really don't have a one-stop shop portal or phone number or dedicated anything. It's like you call in, and the woman who works in our reception area is quite lovely, and I'm so fond of her. But
Must
you
be a
know,
stressful job for her. She
her
gets
to
all the people yelling at her.
Right, that's not fair. Or our wonderful folks in medical constituency folks, they field them, and like, is that fair to them? So
Right.
so we're getting closer. I'm told it's going to happen sooner rather than later. I've been advocating since Lorna McMurray passed away. God rest her soul, for a tip line. For not only worker safety, but anything in the industry.
Anything.
We need one.
Yeah.
It's imperative that we have one, and I'm not going to rest till I see a concept become a reality. But once that is, that would be an avenue for folks to be able to express anything like that.
Absolutely. I think that's empowering for the employees, for the staff, the people who are boots in the ground, and they're trimming bud or whatever they're doing. And I like the old MTA, New York City MTA saying, if you see something, say something.
Yes.
Like, just, you should have, the hotline actually makes a ton of sense. And I feel like a lot of agents or badged agents that work at dispensaries, at licensees, are sometimes not, they don't feel empowered that they can even speak up sometimes, right?
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And we just sent out a bulletin recently, and OSHA and folks now nationally are recognizing cannabis dust as an allergen.
It is. One of my employees
hazard.
has an allergy to it.
Yeah, well, we're finding not only breathing difficulties, but skin.
That's what
skin
happens to
eruptions
one of my
and
employees.
rashes. So more research needs to be done around that, and how do we keep our workers safe? And unfortunately, newer industries, and even way back, like, I use this as an example, like the coal mining industry. Like, how many coal miners got sick because they didn't have the proper protections to protect their lungs?
Well, because they're coal miner owners would just like get in there and keep on picking away at the
and
coal.
the laws have since
OSHA
changed
and
to
all these things have
protect
come, the
folks. And
people.
so we need to make sure our workers are safe and protected,
Mm-hmm.
and that if they are experiencing anything, that they need to let their supervisor know, and limit their exposure in those areas. And we just want everyone to be safe at the end of the day. So I think this tip line would, use your word, Jason, empower the 20,000+ people who work in the cannabis industry in Massachusetts, that they know that they have a direct line to be able to share anything like that.
Is it that big? 20,000 under licensed operators? Or are you talking
Registered
about
agents, yeah.
there's 20,000 registered agents?
Yeah, plus.
Wow, that is a number I hadn't heard before. That's amazing to me. And they should feel like they have a voice, right? If something is happening.
They absolutely should feel like they have a voice, and also every owner of a ME or an MTC needs to have SOPs in place around protecting workers and around whistleblowing policies.
Oh, interesting. Is that going to be new or is that existing?
No, that exists.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we have that in our SOPs. We 100% have that. I'm not as close to the SOP side. I am an owner, but I'm not super close to the SOP side. But I do know we have a ton of them, pages and pages of them. A couple, I know we're got like 15 minutes left, so I want to be utilizing this time really well. One of the big topics for me that's been more relevant to kind of as a brand is advertising rules and marketing and stuff like that. Like, can you take us a little, like, is there anything planned for updating those things, or are you waiting for the operators to reach out to you to be like, hey, we need some changes here?
Okay, so that's a big topic too, and it's a lot of moving parts. So let me try to unpack that as well. So again, you have the Controlled Substances Act, which makes cannabis a Schedule 1. And that prohibits interstate advertising, TV, radio. You have the FCC that monitors that could levy big fines. You have the FEC, the Federal Trade Commission, which
FTC,
also looks to make sure that folks aren't making claims like this is going to cure this or that. So they can also levy heavy sanctions and fines. So that's on the federal level. Now, okay, social media, right? Where do most people get their news is social media, right? And so let's look at that. So that's kind of really out of our jurisdiction too, because these platforms, it's a kind of a gray area in all honesty, but like the platforms I'm aware of, TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook don't allow cannabis ads, but will allow hemp advertisement. So there's that.
Right.
Okay. So those are all things you have to consider. Yeah. And so then our regulations, so you can, like you have a sweatshirt, so you can advertise that, right? It doesn't appeal to young people. It doesn't have cartoon characters. It doesn't have celebrity endorsements that would appeal to young people. So on the state level, you can't have things that appeal to people under 21.
Right.
And you can't, or your products can't have neon colors or shaped like cartoons or anything like that.
Yeah, and I guess I'm not really talking, I mean, I specifically, we
I'm
get
gonna
those
to
rules.
what you're gonna,
okay, keep on going then, go.
So there's that. And then, you see billboards all over the place. And so some people think we have groups that I've met with that think we're overly prescriptive, and some people think we're not prescriptive enough. And so they say, on the billboards, for instance, you're supposed to have consume responsibly, and I need the Hubble telescope to read the disclaimer because
I've been by some of these billboards, and it's the disclaimer is,
you can't
again,
read it.
According to the regulations, you have to have a disclaimer like that on your
now
billboard.
According to our regulations, you also have to pick two from the underline on 500-105, and then you have to have the long that it's not evaluated by the FDA.
But anybody's driving to bypass that thing.
So I'm open to maybe have much less disclaimers, but a font that's legible. Like alcohol, please consume responsibly. Everyone could read it, right? So I would think people would not be opposed to that. Okay, so let's not have War and Peace length disclaimers underneath, but let's have maybe less is more, and something that people can actually read as they drive by. So
because you have to think about, there are some media platforms out there, say like Talking Joints Memo, who has media space, right? And you can buy banner ads from them, right? So it's like, in the banner ads, do you have to include all of that language in each one? And then all of a sudden, like, where can you fit like your product in that?
Your product,
because it's a mobile app and it's like that big on the screen.
Right. So, and then there's, and I think this is probably where you were going with it, the discounts of it, like.
Yeah. So this is where I was really going with discounts and stuff like that, because then there's like loyalty programs, and that's ways to go like direct.
Right. So we issued a bulletin a few months back, and so it gets a little nuanced, I have to be honest. So the advertising is sponsored, and it's not directly to Kim Roy. It's sponsored on it's just sponsored to the masses. Okay, so that's where you can't show product. You have to be very careful. So when you have an opt-in, so on your website, you have to be very careful, right? But if you have an opt-in newsletter, that's my understanding of our memo, my interpretation as one commissioner,
Right.
is that then because I opted in to your newsletter, therefore I'm asking you for information. I'm not. It's not like unsolicited advice. I
Right. You're
solicited
soliciting
this
it because you subscribe.
and then you can inform me that the pre-rolls are
$5 or something
yes.
like that.
Okay. Or if somebody walks in the store and into a retail and inquires, so that person is asking for that information specifically for them, then you can share that. But to mass produce it and just sponsor it and it's not specific to a person is the discounts are a no-no that way.
Yeah, and this is actually going to clear up a lot for existing operators who worry about stuff like this. First of all, you should be worrying about your own business and making sure you can grow your own customer base. I'm a big proponent in just focusing on yourself and not ratting out your competitors and stuff like that, because I'm sure you get emails from people being like, this person's advertising this and this person's advertising this.
I have.
And in reality, though, it's I think my previous investigator, Ryan, he had mentioned this, which is really smart to think about for the people who are listening, who are licensed operators, which is just because you see it in the market doesn't mean it's compliant. It just means we haven't enforced it because we haven't seen it yet, right? So it's like until they get wind of something like that, they don't see it. And so it's like that is just what it is. And maybe the next time they go for an investigation, there'll be a notice of deficiency, right? Who knows? But the point is, it's like just doing what we can within the rules without ratting on our competitors, be like, oh my God, they're doing all these things, and they're focus on your own business and grow your own business, and that's how you'll succeed. Which we really
Did that clear it up for you though on advertising a little bit?
Yeah, exactly. So that memo is helpful, and again, as the voice of one commissioner, not the whole group. It's
And
very,
everything I've said today is a voice of one commissioner,
Right.
not
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So it's really about that one-on-one language.
Mm-hmm.
But to clarify just this last part, which is, are there any changes coming up in the future? Are there anything in the queue right now that people are like starting to get talking about?
I would say right now, and I think we're going to segue to this, social consumption, and that might actually impact advertising.
Yeah, how are you going to do that with
Right.
social consumption?
So,
Yeah.
Right. So I would say as individually, as a whole, I don't think that's the front burner right now is social consumption. That's the front burner. So we
That
just
potentially could trickle down a bunch of other changes.
it
Potentially,
could, and like we just did delivery, right?
Yep.
So how long and advocacy? You can't underestimate advocacy in this industry
Right.
because the delivery operators, and I met with so many of them, and I know so many of them, and they were frustrated for a long time because they had two drivers, two agents in a car, which doubled the cost of having the agents in the car, and they were really frustrated by that, and they felt like they were in this economic model to nowhere because
Right.
it was cost prohibitive, but. No, the delivery was before my time as a commissioner. And my historical understanding is that without the two agents in the car, there would not have been a delivery model because there were
was part of
concerns.
the
That was
first-
part
yeah.
of getting it done.
Right.
Okay. So then the commission asked for all the notices of deficiency, any incidents, car accidents, anything. So we could look at to see
the
how
data.
the data to see if it impacted public safety. And we looked at other jurisdictions that had one agent in a car. So we waited and I listened to local law enforcement. I wanted to know what they thought about one agent in a car. So we did approve that 2-1, which was a big deal for them. But in commission world or any world where there's regulations in the government, it's a process.
Right.
So we decide we're going to tackle delivery 2-1. Okay. And then we hear back from stakeholders and we talk about how we want to redline the regs, but then we have to send it out. We have to work with the secretaries of state office, and then we have to send it out to the public because we need to get public part of the law. You have to get public comment, and then we bring it back, and then we redline again, and then we go back to the secretary of state's office. So it takes a long time
Right.
to go through
Yeah.
all of these steps. So that was our focus. Micro businesses, great idea, but it was a bridge to nowhere for a lot of folks. They couldn't get
I think it was
more
how many
couldn't
licensees are
scale.
actually micro businesses?
Think
Maybe
about
a
it. For
couple?
a micro
Yeah.
business to scale, they have to put themselves out of business.
Right.
Like get rid of all your plants or destroy them to be able to. And who can do that?
Right.
Nobody can do that.
Right.
Didn't make sense. So we fixed the micro business license type. They're able to own more than one license now. They're able to scale. Hopefully, get investors to grow their business. So we addressed delivery license type as well, and we included not only B2C, business to consumer, but we addressed B2B. So like an independent testing lab that's going out and getting a minuscule amount of cannabis. Why are we subjecting them to 2 agents in a car? So we fixed that as well.
That's great.
Yeah, so those are all good things. That was the front burner. That's done now.
Yep.
So now the front burner is social consumption, and so that's a big deal. And it was unveiled yesterday.
Yeah, so I looked through it. The 3 different types I think are really interesting. The event one, I think that one is really exciting because we have things like Flower Expo, and Jason Bellows, a fan of ours over here, and we're a fan of his, and we go to Flower Expo every year. But that must have thrown you guys for a loop because you're like, what do I do with this? Because it's a not consumption event. I guess it is a consumption event, but there's live product there now. And it has to be seed to sale. You have to have your metric tags and all these things. And I think there was some mystery shoppers. At least I heard, a few instances of people like, "Hey, I think there's an investigator over there, like looking at this booth or whatever." But now the event license type, you can now apply for that and be like, all right, so for the next 2 days at Flower Expo in Greenfield, we're going to do these, this is what it's going to look like.
And everybody will be better off for that because it'll put more controls and safeguards to make sure everything is safe. It's all tracked within metric. It's stored properly. It's all secured. We want everybody to enjoy themselves at an expo, but we want to make sure it's also safe at the same time.
And to be fair, I didn't actually... I'm an operator, so I
didn't
have
say
very
Flower
few.
Expo, I said a expo.
An expo. No. But I was getting to is like I didn't listen to the whole thing. Like, how is just for the event one really quickly, and then we can move on to the other ones. Is there going to be like a vault on site, or is it up to the...
You're asking me things. So part of the confines of open meeting law is what you heard yesterday. I heard for the first time. That was the only information I have. Right. Next week, we're going to get a red line version of the regulations, which will put the meat on the bones, and I'll have more detail.
And who writes those then internally?
So it's we have working groups. So I was a lead on the HCA working group, and we work with attorneys within the commission to help us to craft the regulations. So every time you see regulations, there's usually a working group behind them that helps.
And so depending on even which section inside the regulations, like there's a working group just for that one section, for instance.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So that's good to clarify too, because it's not like you're going to right from here to your laptop and be like, hey, I'm going to write these regs real quick, redline it, and like send it over.
No, there's a lot of thought and deliberation that goes in before it even reaches us, the full board, and then there's a lot of thought and deliberation that goes in once we receive it. And
because you have to have a lot of foresight too to be like, how could this potentially be abused, or how could this be misconstrued?
Well, I call it unintended consequences, and we have to always think of the unintended consequences of every action that we make. If we do A, B, we'll see happen if we do those things. So in a lot of times it's kind of long, awkward, and boring and messy, if you will. Like we literally live edit as we're at public meeting, and it takes hours because first of all, we can't talk outside of public meeting. We can't talk, and that gets a little, how do I say this, weird sometimes because we can't talk.
Right.
So we have to do it in public for transparency purposes. So we do live edit them, and they, and we do take into account what they do is we have a public hearing, and people can come testify in person, or they can submit virtually, or they can do written testimony, and we synthesize all of those, and we go through and we make sure we have an understanding of what the public and the stakeholders are advocating for. And I always tell folks, I'm open to listening to any idea or recommendation as long as it doesn't jeopardize public health or public safety.
Yeah, and how, I guess if somebody was to, what's the best way to utilize you and your skill set? If there's some change that needs to happen, what's the best way to use your role as an operator? I come to you and I'm like, hey, Commissioner Roy, here's the issue.
There you go. That's the best way to use my skill set.
Use your
Commissioner
voice,
Roy,
basically.
Here's my issue, and whether it's a change you want in the regulation or a current, present challenge, I get emails many copious amounts of emails that people bring different issues to my attention, and I try to make myself really available as best I can to meet with anyone.
Well, we're talking about almost 1,000 license holders that have commenced already, right? So it's almost 800,
Yep.
So now we're talking about potentially at any given moment, you're getting, 20 of them from licensed operators who are actively doing something and maybe actively have an issue. And you're like, okay, let's try to figure this out.
Exactly.
Do you have an assistant also to triage these things? I know Neil is here from your press secretary.
Yeah,
but
Neil's wonderful. He's our communications
Do you have
team.
an assistant also?
Yes, I have an executive assistant who helps me coordinate my calendar and my schedule. A lot of moving parts, things come on, things go off all the time. So I have an open door our policy, and and all I ask is please send me an agenda ahead of time so I have an understanding of why you want to have the meeting, and if there's something I need to research, that'll give me time to do so.
Yeah, that's great. And then just to wrap, because we're at time here on the social consumption. So there's the event type, there's the social consumption lounge type.
Yeah,
right?
so let's back up. There's a supplemental one, which they kept referring to as the classic, meaning if you have an existing ME and
Right, I
you
was gonna
have
get to that one
a
too.
room or a space within your ME, and once it would obviously, I don't know what the regulations red line version looks like, but if it was compliant with that, or you had like an adjoining or an adjacent part of your facility that could be designated for it, that's the supplemental one. And then you have the hospitality one. If I owned a yoga studio or a paint studio, that I could possibly be able to have that a hospitality license.
So that's
type.
almost like a liquor license at that point, where you can go in. But in
it's-
this case, it's consumption though, because
Yeah,
you can't
but-
take it to go. You have to
cannot
consume
take it to-
everything wherever you
You have
are,
to
right.
buy it and consume it where you're at.
on site. Yeah.
Yes. And so, but also now you have to worry about worker safety and smoke in the air.
yeah.
And so we are going to require ventilation systems. So, but the nice thing with cannabis is you don't always have to smoke it or
exactly.
combust it, or you can, there's gummies, there's brownies, there's seltzers, there's, you name infused foods. So there's other ways to be able to consume it without combusting.
Yeah, and that's one of the fun things about running a company like ours is that we always feel like, since we're not on the combustion side ourselves, the idea of having almost like that winery experience, right? Come bring us a person in for
Like
a
a
tour,
tasting.
and then you just do a tasting at the end. It's not like we're trying to get people super high or anything like that. It's just like, hey, come sample our products, and you get a tour of the facility, and you just consume your little shot of good vibes or whatever, and then you go on with the rest of your day. You know what I mean? Whereas, because I don't want to be in the business of owning a lounge or a restaurant necessarily myself, but the supplemental one is interesting.
And
Although
that is the event one, which we started with.
yeah, the event one I think it's just a no-brainer because I know all of the major people who run the events in Massachusetts, and I've talked at length with them like how we can't do consumption or something like that, because not like we're trying to get a bunch of people high, but it's more just like I just want people to try our product, and so we have to always cannibalize it in maybe that's not the best term for it, but like we always have to take all the cannabinoids out of it just to be like, here's has to be totally uninfused to be able to actually sample it, which puts a strain on us too, because we're in full production mode like nonstop.
Right.
It's like, okay, now
You have to
switch
uninfuse.
off that and just
Right.
uninfuse everything,
That's
and
right.
then take all those samples and give it to the
So
marketing
that'll
team.
be a change for the in your eyes for the positive to be able to offer that, but you'd have to wait till the full regulations are out,
Yeah,
and
we
you'd
can't
have
wait.
to be fully compliant within that regulatory
Yeah, of
scheme.
course.
But I did notice another comment on your LinkedIn, and it was around badging, and a lot of people.
Oh, right, the
Yeah, so I just
badging
want to touch
thing.
on that. So we've heard from so many people that it's really cumbersome, if you will, the badging requirements. And I've seen people look, I have a fan. Right? They have so
we have
many.
a cultivation, we've got a
Yes.
manufacturing, we
Right.
got the dispensary, and I
know-
got a medical license on top of that, so now I get 6 badges.
Right. And we did improve a little bit where you had to renew after the first year, and then you had a couple of years subsequently, then you didn't have to renew again. But other states like Colorado, it's one badge that follows you around.
Yeah.
So I know Acting Chair Stebbins, he's focused on badging as well. So I don't rule that out. I think that could be maybe in the first quarter of next year. And please, folks,
be helpful,
don't
though.
quote me or hold me to this, but I'm hopeful maybe we can do badging or something around badging to make. And you think about outdoor cultivators, right? And I hadn't really
Yes.
stopped to think about this. So you have a limited grow, right? And Croptober is your
Yep.
time, right? And so you don't need all those people
Right.
from November to throughout the winter until you need them again in the
Right.
the early spring. So then to have to find temporary work and go through all of that badging is
And
really
sometimes it could take a few weeks to get your badge back,
yeah.
right?
So mindful of our outdoor cultivators as well, who need
30 people
for
the
a
next
limited
next
time.
3-4 weeks. That's it.
Exactly. Or
Yeah.
even to be able to say, I want to borrow from the guy down the street a couple of workers. Right now, that's not possible.
I know that would be a huge help for us, because we do have one employee who is double badged, who works at a different license,
Yeah.
and will come here and help out part time.
Yeah, but he's
And
double badged.
They have to be double badged, right? So
Right.
he actually just got his temporary today.
Right.
So he's off to the races. So now he can
Yeah.
actually physically touch product now,
Right.
and we don't have to watch him the entire time. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
He's not a guest.
he's not a guest anymore. He's not a visitor. He doesn't have the visitor badge on anymore.
So
it's a real
I
legitimate
I
badge.
saw that, and I know that's been a topic on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah.
Around badging. So it is in my mind to. I hope to hopefully tackle next cycle of regs, testing, badging.
Yeah. Anything else popping up before I let you go?
Let's see.
We could also promote something also
Yeah,
too if
I
you're
mean,
looking.
just social consumption. I'm eager to learn more about that. I think this is a really big deal. I know folks who have been waiting for a long time, and the responses we got for the people that physically came to Union Station was very positive yesterday. So I think people are really excited about that.
And which commissioner is in the working group for that one?
So that's Acting Chair Stebbins and Commissioner Camargo.
Camargo as well. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. And I will be helping Commissioner Camargo on the public awareness, because other states that have rolled out social consumption, their regret was we didn't really educate and inform the public.
Consumers.
So, and the nice thing about this is they're also taking into account medical patients who may be at different dosages.
Yeah, that's a thing that we've dealt with internally ourselves, because it's hard to, even in our marketing efforts on our website and stuff like that, we have what's considered a high dose product of 500 milligrams of THC in one ounce bottle. And we also were the ones who, and I spoke to you about this already, about getting the guidance documents changed, but the 1,000 milligram product, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the reasons why we chose to go to a higher dose was because people loved our original product, which was 100 milligrams. But they just were like, we just need more. And we're like, what do you mean? Because I'm like a 3 milligram, 5 milligram guy. Maybe at one night I'll have like 10 milligrams, like a crazy person. But I'm like, I had to come to the realization that I'm not the core consumer all the time. And the people who really love weed really love weed. And so they love the high dose stuff. And we've heard stories from people who are like, I'll have half a bottle and I'm just functioning for the rest of the day and I feel great. And I'm like, I would be in a not hospital. I'd be like shivering in bed, being like, please go to bed. I want to go to sleep now. And praying for some kind of relief. But some people just have really high tolerances. And so it's interesting you bring that up, because it's like, even that in social consumption setting, it's like, then you got tips training, which I saw, which was really interesting. It's like, how do you know if a person's actually intoxicated and they can't drive or, commute home or whatever? There's a lot more things to unravel. And I do not envy your position sometimes, because it's going to be complicated. It's going to take time. And we obviously, in social equity, I think they're trying to move from 3 years to 5 years after their commence operations of the first one.
Correct.
Which I think is smart, because I think that's what messed up the delivery a little bit, because it was just like...
Well, you asked me what's on the horizon. Yeah. That is actually on the horizon. So the exclusivity period will run out on the delivery, which commenced in April 1st. And we had 36 months to evaluate it. And so now the commission at the beginning of the year is going to bring that we have to present the data and determine whether or not we want to extend the exclusivity period. I think Colorado went to 7 years on that. So
wow.
Yeah, so that's on the horizon, and that's something that is mandated on the horizon.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's good to hear. Yeah, I'm kind of a free capital market person myself, but I totally understand the equity portion of it, social equity portion of it. I'm not I am a minority business enterprise, so I'm a disadvantaged business, but I'm not personally a social equity. However, I think I do qualify. I just never submitted for it. But
perhaps avail yourself to submitting for
I probably should at some point, because then have access to the social consumption stuff just for the supplemental, because like I said, I just want to have that winery experience where people can come in and they can try and sample our products and they can leave. I'm not trying to start a bar, you know what I mean? I'm not trying to get people super high and like they can't function, even though of course our staff will be trained to identify these things through tips and et cetera. And in those cases, I actually did see a carve out in there, which was really nice, which is ventilation systems will only be required based on the usage of, for instance, combustion.
Right.
Like you don't have to necessarily, if you're making brownies for people, you don't necessarily have to have air ventilation
and
system.
that's your, detecting impairment with folks. And when I first became a commissioner, it was brought to my attention that in the driving schools in Massachusetts that there was no education around cannabis impairment behind the wheel. The alcohol, as there should be, and everyone knows about .08 and the breathalyzer and plenty of information. And young people know don't drive drunk.
Right.
But they were getting information on social media which said, oh, you drive slower or better or safer or this or that. So I put a working group together with AAA and the RMV, and I think we had EOPS in there. We had a bunch of folks, and it took us about a year. And I met with the higher ups at AAA, and they had a foundation of a curriculum built for Rhode Island for health classes. And what they did was they donated that entire curriculum, refilmed the whole thing for Massachusetts. So it's based on Massachusetts laws, rules of the road and the laws, and it's all evidence-based. It was peer-reviewed, the first iteration by Brown University, so it's not stigmatization. It's not like DARE. It's not a scared straight.
Well, that's the big
It's none of those things. It is if you feel different, you'll drive different, and it shows you the evidence base of why, and to keep young people safe. We just want
it's safety.
We want people to make good decisions at the end of the day, and so we're not judging, we're not stigmatizing. We just want you to make good decisions, and so we give them the tools to be able to do that. And we were the first state in the country to offer cannabis impairment curriculum. It's called Shifting Gears: The Blunt Truth About Marijuana and Driving. I announced it with at the time Lieutenant Governor Polito and the Register of Motor Vehicles, and since then other states have followed us.
That's
in
great.
That, and 50,000 young people a year get this education now.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I think because education is really what comes from, and that's, I think education is the fastest way to destigmatization, right? So for us, we're all about education, try to educate people about the plant, but also our products. And when it comes to things like driving inebriated, or however you say, intoxicated, don't do it. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And you can do a lot of damage. And so it's all about public safety. We want to make sure people can consume however they're going to consume, but are also doing it in a safe way. So definitely in agreement with you on that one.
Thank you. And thank you for having me on today.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for coming.
Conversation.
And then next time you have to come by for a tour, I know you're on a tight schedule. So
yes, definitely.
All right. Thank you so much, Commissioner.
Thank you, Jason, for having me. I appreciate it.